In our very privileged, excessive modern world, I think only about 2 to 5% of all t-shirts are actually great and fit really well. And this just happens to be the one for me. Hey, it's Matt O'Leary, and it's finally time to rank the albums of the mighty Porcupine Tree. This is a band who, at least 2 of their albums, probably 3 or 4, would crack my top 50, top 25 of all time, no doubt. Porcupine Tree is, of course, the ultimate British progressive rock outfit, stemming back from the late 80s or early 90s from Steven Wilson's Magnificent Brain. If Yes and King Crimson and Genesis and Rush are some of the biggest names from the original generation, then Porcupine Tree are among the Marillions, the Dream Theaters, the Hakens of this second and third wave of the unpinnable thing we call prog rock or prog metal. And like Dream Theater, like Haken, Porcupine Tree have integrated metal into a more traditional symphonic sound, in this very captivating way. And along with that are a host of other idiosyncratic genres that Wilson and co. carry in. Now, fans of Porcupine Tree will know that the band has not always been tied to metal. There's the 90s, which is a period of albums that I only recently really discovered in a very intentional way. I'd heard the records, but never really heard them, never culled the herd. So I've been digging and trudging through those records in the last few years, and now it's time to go from my least favorite to number 1 in this truly epic and excellent catalog. At number 11 is a pretty obvious choice, I think. I think it's their worst album, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. You can't really blame them because it's a debut and they're just a bunch of young lads going for it, but it's got to be On the Sunday of Life from 1991. I didn't know what all this meant. This was compiled from 2 cassette-only releases in 89 and 91, and I think you can hear that. It's a very scatterbrained mixtape of songs, and even the name Porcupine Tree was chosen at random from a group of just nonsense names. The songwriting doesn't stand out in the least, but I think the sound design talent is here. The production, it's pretty advanced for a one-man show like this to be doing this kind of layering and advanced production, So I think there is a seed of greatness here, and you can clearly tell that Steven was musically proficient across the board. The clear standout for me is This Long Silence, which really shows this off. It's got great layering to it. It's got some excellent, just really clever tonal choices. The whole thing is tongue-in-cheek, and, we can do this indulgent prog thing. But come on, Steven, this is your destiny. This is what you were born to do. Just admit it. Just own up to it, because even when you were pretending, it was better than most. I'll just say that. Number 10 has got to be Up the Downstair, the next album, and I really don't have too much to say about this album, except it's probably Steven's most derivative. It feels like, AI or something like that, even though it was long before that was possible. But, it just lacks kind of a distinctive character. It's interesting historically just to see Steven's musical roots and hear what music was exciting him at this time. But it's just not refined in the least at this point. Number 9 is where the eclecticism of that first album started to bear fruit, if you will. It's got to be The Sky Moves Sideways from 1995. You have the 18-minute title track, which is just a little bit too Pink Floyd at times, except with this crummy 80s and 90s production sound instead of the rich, organic sound of the 70s. You can really hear Steven's affinity for both periods in this track. He likes ambient music. He likes classic rock and prog. He likes all sorts of experimental stuff from the 80s and 90s, including electronica, as this song veers completely sideways into this bumping electronic beat with Colin Edwin's bass playing a more prominent role. Trouble. I do really like the writing on this first track, this opening track. It's, got excellent bass lines, and Stevens' chord progressions are smart and engaging, and it's probably the highlight. From there, it's a bit of a mixed bag. There's the metal edge of Dislocated Day, the extremely lethargic The Moon Touches Your Shoulder, or the ambient improv of Moonloop. Overall, I think this is just a premonition of what's to come, and again, a little too into David Gilmour. And we just keep rolling on chronologically, which is weird, but every album in the 90s just seems to get a little bit better. So number 8 has got to be 1996's Signify. Which is a pretty solid record, and sticks to the ambience of The Sky Moves Sideways with tracks like Waiting Phase 2 or Light Mass Prayers. It's very atmospheric and quite dark, with all the spoken word and the brooding intensity. There's lots of very spacey, near psychedelic moments like those first few albums, but there's also the more structured pop songs on this record too. It's very much a transitional album sonically, and I do really enjoy the heavy title track or others like Sever or Waiting Phase 1 or Dark Matter. Those are the hits for me. Those are the ones I return to. I rarely just pick tracks on a Porcupine Tree album because it is made to be a full album experience, but the rest of it is a little like waiting room music. Although if I heard this in a waiting room, I'd be frightened. Number 7 is the fresh, the hot off the shelves 2022 album Closure continuation. The song Harridan was a thrilling lead-in to the album with Gavin at his absolute best on the kit. All the riffs, all the stops and starts, and all those chilling textures from Richard Barbieri. Of the New Day had all the wholesome, spacious, cathartic magic of their Lightbulb Sun era with the bite of the Harrison era. Sonically, it's impeccable, of course, and writing-wise, it's pretty familiar, but at the same time, pretty far-reaching. Yet, this is one of those strange albums, and it's really a rare thing. It's hard to pinpoint exactly, but objectively, I can't find any fault with the record. I really can't, but subjectively, the experience is quite cold. It sounds endearing, but it doesn't endear me, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't, but I'll just continue. Perfect recordings, perfect performances with this made in Stevens lab feel. Pretty diverse songs across the track list and adventurous song structures, but one I just never find myself wanting to return to for whatever reason. Part of it might be I really don't like the songs Herd Culling or Walk the Plank. I think just the repetition can be a little bit grating, and there's also that vocal in Herd Culling. Yeah. And I'll also say there's just an eerie familiarity to Dignity and Chimera's Wreck. Like, it sounds like those two have been done in Prague before, even if they're a patchwork of multiple songs. And I love the B-sides, Never Enough and Love in the Past Tense. A little less epic than the rest, but I have a better time with those songs for some reason. So yeah, just a weird one, and it's got to be in the lower half of my ranking. At number 6 is an album that gets a lot of hate, I think, in the Porcupine Tree world, and I understand all of the faults. It's too long, it's thematically confusing, but I just always have a good time listening to 2009's The Incident. The Blind House has the usual soft and loud dynamics of the band's albums at this point in their career. It's probably a top 15 PT track for me, with just great vocal harmonies, love the chorus. This whole album, but especially that title track, really does this industrial electronic thing pretty well, but I think Wilson would go on to develop that even further on his first album, Insurgentes. Lots of shorter tracks on this thing that do nicely to break up the album and keep the momentum up. I love Great Expectations or Your Unpleasant Family especially. And Time Flies is a beautiful song. It's very refreshingly sincere and earnest. There are some seemingly aimless moments on the instrumental tracks, I think, and there's that chorus on Drawing the Line, which is just so memeable. But if you like that 2000s era metal stuff, if you fancy yourself a little Nine Inch Nails mixed with a symphonic sound, then just don't listen to the haters on this one. And number 5 is a very different album from The Incident. Kind of a rustic sounding album, at least in comparison to the more heady and calculated stuff. It's 2000's Lightbulb Sun. There are recognizable songs throughout. There's the head-bobbing She's Moved On, with his characteristically lush, delicate vocal harmonies juxtaposed with this bleak, gritty, and sparse verse. Hate Song is another gritty one with that extremely simple bass line, but with so much attitude and just And those nice high harmonic flourishes too, the do-do-do-do. I think Steven just uses his voice perfectly on songs like this. It's not a flashy, it's not a sexy voice. It's not all that powerful, to be honest, but the tone is instantly recognizable and it fits the song so well. It fits the mood. 2 deep cut highlights on the album are the very pleasant The Rest Will Flow, which if it were a color, it would be like a yellow, maybe a marigold. And Where We Would Be, which is similarly pleasant and lovely. I find the epic Rush on Ice very good, very intense in moments, but a little ponderous in others. And 4 Chords That Made a Million is another one for me that I understand the commentary on, this despicable state of modern music. At least that's what it sounds like to me. I get that. It's just grating. Still a very diverse, a very song-based album, which I really love compared to these long psychedelic jam out trips that they were doing before this. And they would just go on to refine and get better and better at this formula. Number 4 thrusts us back into the 90s with probably the least experimental, their least edgy, and their most radio-friendly release, Stupid Dream. Pretty safe, pretty mild. But I can't ignore the songwriting. I think of a song like Pure Narcotic, which is just the purest form of Steven Wilson, where he really started to flex his recording and production quality. The mix on this song is so good, so spotless, and just so clean and pure. And this is also where he started to master that acoustic guitar sound. If you know his music, you know how absolutely drop-dead gorgeous those acoustic guitars can be. I love the way the bass waits to enter until the second verse of the song, and that chorus just gets stuck in my head. Slave Called Shiver and Don't Hate Me move in a grittier direction, but it's still very clean, very accessible. And they really know how to accentuate a certain part by isolating it. The bass line on Slave Called Shiver is just so front and center, and that very simple guitar line on Don't Hate Me is the same thing. Some people find songs like This Is No Rehearsal or Stranger by the Minute to be just a little too breezy, but I really like this side of the band. I think they're songs that wear their 90s on their sleeve, but they're some of the best examples of that 90s soft rock. Really, really strong, really solid album overall. I love it. I don't think it has the heights of the albums coming up on the list, but a great mix of dark and light material on this one. This next album is such a world beater. It's a hard one to put at number 3 on any list ever, and a true breakout album for the band when they really ran the risk at this point of their late 90s and early 2000s sound and shtick just growing tired. In Absentia is just a landmark modern prog album, and if you can believe it, this is my number 3. Blackest Eyes is the Porcupine Tree song that I would share with people when I'm trying to get them into the band. It just has everything they do well: the vocal arrangements, the riffs, the lush chords, the dynamic range. And could you even get a gnarlier groove than The Sound of Muzak? These knotty, twisted, minor acoustic riffs are just a hallmark of Steven's sound, and I think something that really sets apart his music as his music. And whether it's the production or the recording or the arranging or, just the keys that Steven decided to write these songs in, I think the vocal took a massive leap up from 2000's Lightbulb Sun. Something you'll notice if you go back in the discography, if you're not familiar with it, is just the vocals are leagues better on this album and subsequent albums, whether that's due to Wilson's conditioning or, like I said, just learning to write to suit his own voice. This is probably complete blasphemy, but I think the album would have been better off if it would have ended with a heart attack and a lay-by, just cut that last 12 minutes off. This album was coming alongside Coldplay as they came up. It was the same year as Coldplay's second album. And the song Collapse the Light into Earth, what a Coldplay piano progression that is. But that is the tiniest little drop in the bucket to what is just a fantastic, again, can't say enough superlatives about this album. Number 2 is an album that I first experienced on vinyl on a pretty solid sound system, so I always have that impression of it sonically, and really Spotify can do no justice to Fear of a Blank Planet. This is, to me, a much tighter and more fluid listening experience than In Absentia. And it really resonates thematically as this portent of a generation that's just chronically low on spiritual and intellectual depth. As a result of all these modern excesses of various kinds, whether it's pornography or instant gratification through screens or prescription drugs, etc., etc. As a former counselor, actually, in a high school, just this message about the excesses of the modern world and really these unique challenges that face millennials and everyone after really resonates with me on a personal level. Beyond that, the music is probably just the most fully fledged of any Porcupine Tree album. If you really care about the album experience and, again, flow, then this is your album. The 2 ballads on the album perfectly break up the heavier moments. The Fender Rhodes driven My Ashes is just gorgeous. That minor 6th chord that starts the chorus just builds such emotional tension. I love the extra layers that are added on the last chorus of the song Sentimental, and just the throwback to trains in there. Another vocal harmony detail is this one vocal harmony that's added to the last chorus of Way Outta Here. It's just one little thing, one note, but it makes so much difference. And where to even start with Anesthetize? It's their best track along with Arriving Somewhere But Not Here, to me. It's just a phenomenal album, top to bottom, that definitely deserves that spot, that reputation at the pinnacle of modern prog and prog metal. But for me, there's always been one. It's the album that got me into Porcupine Tree, so I get it. There's that aspect to it, but it's also a very different album in approach to Fear of a Blank Planet, where every single song on the album stands apart as its own little world on Deadwing. And I've always loved albums that do that, where every song is like you're jumping to a different planet. And when you have songs of this quality and this variety, it's certainly got to be up there, For me, definitely in my top 10 albums of all time. I could write a book about this album. The opening track was a melody that I had in my head for the longest time before I heard Porcupine Tree at all. And then I heard it on that song, Come to Life. And it was whoa. The spoken word, I could see it being a little strange or cringy to certain people, but it works. It works. Shallow is a slapper-rooney. That thing is a heavy metal radio classic. Lazarus, I love Halo, I love Open Car, two of the harder hitting moments on the album, but I also love the last two songs and how Barbieri plays a larger role on those as kind of the softies, and Mellotron Scratch, like that bridge part, come on. And then there is the big one, Arriving Somewhere But Not Here, my favorite Porcupine Tree track, hands down. Just goes so many different places, and the minute I heard it, I was obsessed. So I don't have too many fancy words for this album, but it's just one that's got my heart totally wrapped up. It's got me in its clutches. I have the album art on my wall in my living room, so, little obsessed. And that's it for Porcupine Tree's discography ranked from top to bottom. Will we have a closure? Will we have a continuation? We'll have to wait and see. I definitely want to hear your ranking below. What are some of your least favorite moments from this massive catalog? What are the pinnacle albums? Does anyone really like the 90s era better than the Gavin Harrison era? Really curious about that. And as always, thank you so much for watching.